Echoes of the Forgotten. Lost soul return. In a town where the past never stays buried, a travel writer dares to enter a house no one speaks of, where a forgotten child's soul still screams for release. But some echoes don't just haunt, they wait. There's a small town nestled between dense forests and mist-covered hills called Black Hollow. A quiet, withering place, untouched by time, where the roads are cracked like dry skin and the houses creak with every gust of wind. Most people who live there are old, tired, and afraid to speak of the past, because in Black Hollow, the past doesn't stay buried. It whispers, it watches, and sometimes it returns. They say the Hollow is cursed, not by gods, but by the forgotten. Julian Crest was a travel writer who specialized in stories about abandoned places and their dark histories. He'd heard of Black Hollow through an obscure online forum filled with accounts too disturbing to be fiction. And one particular entry had gripped him like icy fingers around his neck. It read, "Don't go to the house on Raven's Hill. It's not empty. She never left. She waits. Echoes in the walls, still screaming." Most would have looked away, but Julian was drawn to stories that unsettled the soul. So, with a recorder, a camera, and a notebook, he packed his car and drove into the hills of the forgotten. When he arrived in Black Hollow, it was as though he had crossed into another century. No cell signal, no streetlights, just sagging homes, crooked trees, and eyes peering from half-closed curtains. He asked about Raven's Hill at the only diner in town. The waitress, an elderly woman with milky eyes, froze at the mention. "You'll find no answers up there," she whispered. "Only echoes and screams that don't end." Julian pressed for more, but she walked away trembling, murmuring a name. Lila Thorne. The house was a decaying Victorian manor, perched alone on Raven's Hill like a wound that refused to close. Ivy strangled its frame, and every window was black, as if the night had moved inside. Julian entered. The floorboards moaned under his boots. Dust choked the air, but the strangest thing was the absence of silence. There was always a faint sound, barely audible, like humming, far away, trapped in the walls. In the center hallway, he found a portrait. A little girl, no older than 9, in a pale blue dress with a white ribbon in her hair. Her eyes were not painted like the rest. They were real photographs, glued into the canvas, and they followed him. Scrawled beneath her in faded ink was a name, Lila Thorne. 1891. He would later discover that the Thornes were once wealthy aristocrats who vanished mysteriously in 1902. Lila, their only daughter, was presumed dead, but no body was ever found. Locals claimed they heard crying from the house for weeks after. Julian set up his recorder and began speaking. "This is Julian Crest, documenting the house on Raven's Hill. I believe the spirit of Lila Thorne lingers here, and tonight I intend to make contact." That night, Julian replayed his recordings. Static. A thumping noise. Then, a voice. Faint. Trembling. "Please, help me." He froze. The voice was a child's. He rewound, played it again. The same desperate plea. A second later, a crash echoed upstairs. Grabbing his flashlight, he ascended. Each step protested under his weight. When he reached the top, a coldness seeped into his skin, and he saw small, muddy footprints, bare feet, leading down the hall. He followed them into a nursery. It was untouched by time. Toys lay scattered. A dollhouse stood in the corner. The cradle rocked gently, though no wind blew. On the wall, someone had carved a message. "She's still inside." The closet door creaked open behind him. He turned, no one there. But something moved. He heard a soft giggle, then a voice. "Do you want to play with me?" The air turned bitter. His flashlight flickered, and for just a heartbeat, he saw her, Lila, pale, hollow-eyed, standing in the mirror's reflection, but not in the room. Julian ran. Back at the inn, Julian couldn't sleep. He scoured every document he could find. Lila hadn't simply disappeared. She was sacrificed. The Thornes, obsessed with eternal youth, had performed a ritual, an ancient rite from a forbidden grimoire, to trade their lives for immortality. But the spell required the blood of innocence. Lila was never meant to be spared. Instead, her soul was bound to the house, endless suffering, unable to pass on. The ritual failed, and the Thornes were consumed. Their ashes were never found. Only the girl remained. Julian made a choice. He returned to the house, this time not to document, but to help her. He carried with him an old book he had discovered in the town archives, blackened with age, filled with arcane symbols. One passage spoke of reversal of soul binding. It required fire, salt, and the name of the cursed soul, spoken with compassion. He entered the nursery. The air was thick with sorrow. The walls wept. A child's lullaby hummed from nowhere. Julian poured the salt in a circle, lit the flame, and spoke. "Lila Thorne, you are not forgotten. You are not alone. I remember you. I release you." A scream pierced the house, not angry, just wounded. The flame roared, the walls shook, and then silence. A small hand touched his shoulder. He turned. Lila stood there, no longer pale and ghostly, but whole, smiling gently. A single tear fell from her eye. "Thank you," she whispered, and vanished. The house exhaled, the weight lifted. Julian's recording ends with his voice, trembling but relieved. "This is Julian Crest. The echoes have ceased. The forgotten have found peace. He never returned to haunted places again. But sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind is just right, you can still hear a child's voice whispering in the woods around Raven's Hill. Do you want to play? One last time?"